Welcome, my friends. I wanted to revisit a classic presentation that I did many years ago that still applies today, same way it did back then. This was used for both pharmaceutical and medical device companies to cover the real basic principles of GMPs. That no matter what, as the regulations change, these principles still represent the fundamentals of GMPs. So GMP, if you're watching this, you're probably in regulated industry and know this, but just in case for those that don't, GMP is good manufacturing practices. The original GMPs that came out for the pharmaceutical industry, again, called GMPs, the medical device industry adopted that. As the medical device regulations evolved, it became quality system regulation and now quality management system regulation, but it's still a form of the GMPs, good manufacturing practices, which serve as a foundation for manufacturing safe and effective medical devices and safe and effective pharmaceutical products. And it's all based on quality. Quality could be defined different ways, but quality could mean, that you met requirements. There's a specification, you're meeting that specification, that's quality. Dependability. When you buy a piece of equipment, machinery, you expect it to be dependable, and that's a measure of quality. Does it satisfy a customer's need? Customer asks for X, you give them X. That's quality. Quality could also mean a level of excellence, and it satisfies a need. One way or another, we all have to pay for quality as at a company level. There's cost to do inspections and testing and take other tasks to make sure the product or the process is acceptable. There's also cost to prevent defects by giving your employees training, implementing preventive maintenance programs on your equipment, taking corrective actions, having a thorough corrective and preventive action program. And I guess in reality, corrective action is not really prevention, but if it's broad, you look at the big picture to make sure it's going to prevent future incidents or incidents in other areas that may have not been impacted yet. And then one of the costs of quality is the cost of failure. So if you don't implement anything, you're still going to pay for quality related to the costs associated with defects, failures, customer complaints, loss of customers, scrap rates, etc. So one way or another, you're going to pay for quality. And the argument is if you put a lot of that investment up front, in the long run, you're going to save money and you're going to keep your customers safe and satisfied. And especially in pharmaceutical and medical devices, you want your customers to be safe. You want to provide a good product that's going to help people and not hurt them. So whether we're talking about medical devices or pharmaceutical products or the blood supply, food, cosmetics, they're all regulated by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, whose obligation is there to protect public health. And a little brief history is if you go all the way back to 1905, so over 120 years ago, the Food and Drug Act was implemented. Many say this was a result of the publication of the book called The Jungle that got the attention of President Theodore Roosevelt. And I've read The Jungle. It's as much of a political book as it is a book about some of the horrendous working conditions that were occurring at that time. But it does talk about, has stories and incidents regarding the meat packing industry, which portrays a very filthy and disgusting environment. And it was as a result of that the Food and Drug Act was implemented to start putting in some requirements for foods and drugs. And if I fast forward many decades, there was drug amendments to protect patients from terrible side effects from certain drugs, requiring, safety data up front before new drugs can be marketed and sold. And this was around the time when there was birth defects caused from a medicine or a drug product that was sold in Europe, thalidomide, and many people got sick from that. And it just reinforced why it's important to have those drug safety requirements before a new drug is put on the market. You fast forward, what's not on this is in 1976 is when medical device amendments were approved and the medical device industry was now subject to these regulations. In 1982 is when tamper-resistant packaging became a requirement and the norm. And that was a result of Tylenol being tampered with and people dying. And then a couple years later, it wasn't until 1985, where that says AIDS testing, but it was actually HIV screening for the blood supply, so that before you got a transfusion, you'd know that the blood had gone through some type of screening so that HIV wouldn't be passed on to you as a recipient of donated blood. Some comical advertisements from the past just showing that back in the day when there was no restrictions, pharmaceutical marketing, anyone could say anything. And there's one product on the right, Doctor's Mixer, that said it basically could cure everything: cancer, tumors, ulcers, fever sores, rheumatism, all blood diseases. FDA would obviously never let those kind of statements be published in advertisements these days. Back then, there was no oversight or regulation. And on the left, there's Indian rattlesnake oil, will cure any kinds of pain. Who knows if it actually worked, and who knows if it didn't cause a death or serious injury by ingesting that. So GMPs, they do make good business sense. It ensures that it provides a foundation to make sure that the materials we're selling, in case of the drug industry, that it's the correct identity, strength, purity, and quality, that it will not cause injury or illness, and that it's properly labeled. So, when you look at a label, it clearly tells you and accurately tells you what you're about to take and what's in that bottle, so you don't have a mix-up or an accidental overdose or some other kind of problem. So there's 10 principles of GMPs that, again, were the foundations of GMPs if you go back far enough. And it's very common sense. Now we look at it like, of course, but number one is right procedures. Say what you do. All the ISO standards are based on that premise. I remember the first time I heard about ISO standards, they said, say what you do what you say. But the GMPs actually had this same rationale. Right procedures to say what you do, so it's done consistently from person to person. Follow your procedures. Of course, whatever you say in your procedures, you have to now do that. Follow it. It's there for a reason. It's there for consistency, for accuracy, for safety. And then, of course, you have to document your work. You have to keep records. Records are the evidence. If you have a problem, you need to go back to those records to do an investigation. So you need those records for evidence that you're following the rules, but also helps you keep track of the traceability, and also helps you when you are in problem-solving mode to investigate an issue. Number 4 is validating manufacturing processes. You can write a manufacturing procedure and set up a process and parameters. But you want to make sure you've done an extensive validation to show that these parameters will consistently produce products that meet specifications. So it usually involves statistical sampling, extensive testing to show that the process is stable and consistent and will meet specs. Number 5 is designing and building proper facilities and equipment. You need to have adequate manufacturing space, good layout of the manufacturing process so that there's flow, so that you can prevent potential contamination, you can prevent mix-ups, and it can also allow proper cleaning and sanitation. Which leads us to number 6, which is, once you design and have proper facilities and equipment, you now have to have maintenance on the facilities and equipment. Cleaning, replacement of parts, checking, inspection to make sure the facilities, whether it's air filtration systems, whether it's just walls and ceilings and floors, or actual manufacturing equipment, to make sure it's working properly and you're taking preventive action so that there's not a problem. Number 7 is having competent workers. Hiring workers with the right level of education and experience to meet the job requirements, and then training them on any of the specifics they need to be aware of as part of their job, whether it's procedures or training on how to use a piece of equipment, training on requirements to make sure that they're competent to do their job properly. Number 8 is sanitation. Of course, if you're making a medical product or a pharmaceutical product that's going to come in contact with the human body or be ingested by the human body, you obviously want it to be clean and free from contaminants, so having proper sanitation is critical. The level of sanitation is obviously going to vary tremendously between whether you're talking about water for injection or a pacemaker that's implantable versus, maybe something like a wheelchair, which may not have to have as much controls. But sanitation could include housekeeping, cleaning, air filtration, clean room controls, and pest control, and even what employees have to wear, like gowns and hairnets, and what type of clothing, whether they could wear nail polish or wear makeup or hand washing activities, etc. Number 9 is controlling for quality. A lot of people will say that's like an old school term. You shouldn't control quality. You should put in all the preventive measures so that you have quality built into your processes. I agree with that. So quality control could include a lot of things. But often when we think of quality control, we're thinking of those inspections and checks in the process, whether it's inspecting raw materials and components from your suppliers, or in-process checks to show that the process is meeting requirements, or your final inspections before you release products to warehouse or to customers. And principle number 10 is auditing for compliance, making sure you have independent auditors who are verifying, are you maintaining all your processes? Are you following your procedures and keeping the proper records that you're required to keep? And as mentioned, you want to have trained employees. You want to have competent employees. So you want to train them so they understand their responsibilities and requirements, their procedures that are applicable to their job, and that they have the right background to do that job. And buildings, you have to consider what level of lighting, lighting so people can see what they're doing in manufacturing, and QC inspection, having the appropriate ventilation and air filtration, heating and cooling, especially if there's temperature sensitive materials. You want to control the environment and monitor it. You have to have adequate plumbing, obviously, with this common sense, but garbage removal, controls for sewage, having adequate washing facilities and sanitation, and again, maintenance of your buildings and maintenance of your equipment, using the right equipment, cleaning the equipment, maintaining it, making sure it's functioning properly, and then having control for your components, how you handle them when they're received, what kind of testing or inspection do you do, how you store them, how you identify them, and what's the process to approve or reject these materials before they go into inventory and are used in manufacturing. In production, you're controlling production through the use of written work instructions and procedures, outlining is there an allowance for reprocessing or rework, and how is that controlled to make sure it doesn't cause any problems, controlling contaminants so your products are not contaminated by environmental conditions, making sure your packaging and labeling meets requirements and is examined or inspected. Labeling mix-ups, one of the big reasons why there's so many recalls. So being able to control your labeling to prevent mix-ups between different parts or product numbers, lot numbers, etc., different versions, controlling obsolete materials so that they won't get mixed in, and having controls in your warehouse operation to prevent mix-ups between products or between good and bad products, or products that have been inspected or ones that have not. So being able to have quarantine areas or designated areas for items awaiting inspection versus what items have gone through inspection. Having proper inventory rotation, first in, first out, so you don't have old items sitting around for a long period of time and then somebody finally uses it and it may or may not be good. Just like in the grocery store, the milk from last week is the first milk that people grabbed, and the newer milk is behind it. They do that to have inventory rotation so they don't have old milk sitting around for weeks, and protect the products from damage. You don't want to have products being damaged while they're in storage. And as mentioned, you have to keep records of evidence that you're doing all these things. One is so you could keep track of it and know what actually happened. 2 is in case there was a problem, you could use that to help investigate. And records could be all kinds of things, including equipment, cleaning records, maintenance, quality control inspection and testing records, manufacturing batch records, distribution records of where you shipped your products and what products were shipped, customer complaint records, and the list goes on, audit reports, etc. You want to define the testing and quality controls for your raw materials, to any testing that's done in production, your final testing, and of course, any of the test equipment that's used, you want to make sure it's properly calibrated and in good working order and giving accurate results. And your procedures, as a general rule, your procedure should have, what's the purpose and scope of the procedure, who's responsible for doing what, and then what are the step-by-steps to perform that task or meet those requirements. And then you want to control those documents and those procedures, work instructions, and forms so that you know what's the current revision. And as things change, there's designated people reviewing that to make sure they agree with it, that nothing's missing. They approve it. They put the most current versions of make them available to the employees that need them, and remove the obsolete versions and store them in archives so that they cannot get mixed up or accidentally used. And lastly, as a general rule for keeping records, and I can remember learning about record keeping when I first got into the industry, and some simple rules like fill in all the blanks. If something's not applicable, write NA or not applicable. Use ink. Don't use pencil. Don't use magic marker. But use ink. And some companies will even go as far as say you can only use blue ink or black ink, but you can't use red. And then write legibly. For records that still are filled out manually, write legibly so that if someone needs to look at that record, they can understand what's being said there or what's happened. Don't use pencil or whiteout. And if you make a mistake, you're supposed to draw one line through the mistake, initial and date it, and then write the correct information there. So it shows accountability of what the mistake was, how it was fixed, who did it, and when. And you're not supposed to scribble out the mistake you made, just one line through it. So again, I hope you enjoyed this. This is a classic. It's a classic principles of GMPs. It could be applicable to pharmaceutical drug products as well as medical devices. Even in today's environment where regulations and requirements still change and they evolve, these are the basic principles that are still ring true today. Hope you enjoy this and tune in to some of my other sessions. This is Joe Azery at Aztec Regulatory and Quality.